The Helion Interdisciplinary Combat Academy gleamed like a spine of alien glass rising from the rocky plateaus of Drelvac 4, its tower silhouettes caught between twin suns that painted the sky in streaks of violet and copper. The compound sprawled across the high desert, surrounded by phased shielding domes and automated defense arrays. Inside, cadets from 100 species marched through blast corridors and zero-Gai chambers, speaking in clacks, hums, pulses, and vocal cords adapted to atmospheres most humans would never survive. Among them stepped a man with a duffel bag over one shoulder. Sergeant Dane Mercer exited the Gravtram transport with no fanfare. His boots clicked quietly on the polycrete ramp as he made his way toward the Academy's central intake chamber. He wore the muted greens and browns of Earth's planetary search and rescue forces, dusty from years in the field. No armor, no augmentation. Just a calm expression, a clean gait, and a clipboard in his hand with a hard copy transfer signature. The scanners registered him, hesitated, and turned green. No weapons, no known biological hazards, no special threat classification. From the mezzanine above, a group of cadets watched silently. Most of them were enormous Vekari with crystalline musculature, coiled sullet with body mass thrice his size, and at least 2 bipedal species with built-in kinetic armor. "That's it? That's the human?" one cadet whispered, her voice translating with a click through the room's ambient autolinguist. "He's so soft," another muttered. "I thought they brought service animals, not trainees." A quiet ripple of snickers followed. Dane didn't stop walking. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. He moved with the unhurried rhythm of someone used to arriving where he didn't belong and getting the job done anyway. From a vaulted control station above the arrival bay, Commandant Yarna, a tall, ink-skinned Solat with 12 jointed fingers and a cybernetic lens over her left eye, watched Dane with clinical interest. "Human male, Earthborn," she noted aloud to the biometric officer beside her. "Resting pulse, 52. Cortisol profile, minimal. Unusual," the officer said. "Most new cadets run hot. He doesn't." The Academy's induction cycle began immediately. Cadets were tossed into week-long, grueling assessments, partial vacuum acclimation, full-body strain resistance testing, neural response calibrations, and cultural scenario challenges that sometimes turned heated. Dane passed each station with unremarkable precision. He didn't dominate the physical trials, at least not by alien standards. He couldn't outlift a Velathin or outpace a Sauric with 3 lungs. But he finished every event without complaint, injury, or need for aid. Quiet, efficient, and to many, unsettlingly neutral. When the obstacle course simulation glitched mid-run, sending a collapsing pillar toward a pair of Stronarian twins, it was Dane who acted. No theatrics, just a sprint, a dive, and a controlled roll that pushed them clear. Then he simply stood, dusted off, and rejoined the course. The others began noticing, not admiring, just noticing. But not all attention was neutral. Thrask, the Kragon cadet, had noticed him the moment he arrived. A towering biped armored in dark volcanic plates, Thrask moved with the weight of a living tank. His species had evolved on high-gravity death worlds where everything hunted everything. Kragon hierarchy was built on intimidation, the roar, the posture, the scent. Every move was dominance or submission. And humans? As far as Thrask was concerned, humans were neither. They were beneath the system. "Skin creature," Thrask growled the first time they crossed paths in the hydration hall. He loomed over Dane, talons tapping on the carbon tile floor. "Did your nestlings mistake this for a tourist shelter?" Dane looked up, calmly. "Are you asking a question, or just practicing your chest puff?" The Kragon bared his fangs. Several nearby cadets froze, waiting for a fight. Dane didn't blink. He just sipped his canteen and moved past him. No fear, no aggression, no interest. That, more than anything, irked Thrask. Later that week, the schedule announced a major event, the annual Intimidation and Response exercise. An interspecies training designed to simulate predator-dominated scenarios, it was infamous for pushing cadets to their psychological and sensory limits. Each year, one species was selected to perform its primal dominance display, meant to simulate hostile battlefield conditions, panic suppression, and fear control. Some roared, some flared. One species emitted subsonic pulses that caused temporary cognitive inversion. This year, the Kragan had been selected. "Of course," muttered a Sullet medic, just when the sleep cycles were getting better. The chamber was massive, a hollow sphere lined with neural dampeners and resonance shielding, its walls lit in shifting blue patterns that tracked sound distortion. Each cadet had their own bio-calibrated observation zone with safe thresholds based on species profile. Dane stood alone in his. No buffer, no adjustments, just a man in his standard-issue uniform, arms crossed lightly as he waited. Around him, the mood was tense. "Place your bets," someone whispered. 10 says the human blacks out in under 10 seconds. 3 says he won't even last that long. Even the instructors had their doubts, though none voiced them aloud. Then the signal came. Captain Yarna entered the center with her long coat trailing behind her. She activated the Omni field, stabilizing the gravity zone. "Begin sequence," she said. "Thrask, you are cleared to perform dominance display." The Kragan stepped forward. His movements were heavy, deliberate. He circled the room slowly, allowing every species to get a clear view of his size, his mass, his predatory grace. Then he stopped in the middle of the chamber and turned to face the group. He stretched his spine, raised his chest, jaw unhinged slightly. The room dimmed, and he roared. It hit like a shockwave. The force of it wasn't just sonic, it was physical. Air trembled, light vibrated. One of the viewing panels fuzzed with static as its shielding overloaded momentarily. Several cadets collapsed immediately. A Stronarian staggered and clung to the railing, its gills flaring in confusion. A Vakari emitted a distress frequency. Every living creature in the chamber responded to the sound. Everyone except Dane Mercer. He flinched slightly, just a twitch at the corner of one eye. But he remained standing, breathing, watching. Thrask noticed, and froze. Yarna made a note on her datapad. Human still conscious, no flight response, pulse rate stable. Thrask turned away from the center and began walking toward Dane. "Override," Yarna warned. That was the end of the simulation. "Not for me," the Kragan said. "He mocked me by not reacting." "I didn't," Dane said calmly. "You stood still. You denied the signal. That is mockery." "It's just a sound," Dane replied, adjusting his stance. "I've heard worse." That stopped the room. "You've heard worse?" Thrask thundered. "In deep canyons," Dane replied, voice level. "Echoes bounce, sounds amplify. Sometimes you shout to locate someone, and the echo that comes back sounds like the world's ending." Thrask snarled. "Face me, human." Dane nodded and stepped forward. The Kragan squared his stance. His claws dug small cracks in the metal floor as his lungs inflated. Then he roared again, full power, full focus, right into Dane's face. The chamber lights flickered. One of the observation decks lost power. A seismic alert pulsed briefly in the upper corner of the screen. Cadets shielded their faces. Some fell. A few screamed. And Dane? He didn't move. He stood upright, let the sound pass through him like a hurricane over stone. Then he inhaled slowly, eyes changing, no longer calm, no longer simply watchful. Something older surfaced. Not fury, not bravado. Something honed by thousands of years of humans calling out into vast wilderness alone, knowing that what answered back might kill them. Dane raised his chest. And he roared. The sound didn't match his body. It shouldn't have been possible. It reverberated with the power of ancient canyons and forest infernos, a thunderous, lung-ripping blast meant to frighten apex predators from striking. The chamber rattled. The overhead sensors spiked into red. One of the holograms flickered out entirely. The roar struck Thrask like a physical blow. He stumbled backward. And silence fell. Every cadet stared. Even Yarna's face had changed, eyes narrowed, expression unreadable. In the flickering aftermath, the seismic alarm chimed again. Dane lowered his voice. "Still, think I'm fragile?" Thrask didn't answer. He couldn't. Later, in the xenobiology labs, the data review was frantic. "That wasn't just a voice," one researcher said. It caused harmonic interference across 3 frequencies. His diaphragm shows conditioned reinforcement. This is trained, learned, repeated thousands of times. But why would anyone learn to roar? He was a rescue specialist, another said. Worked canyons, bears, cougars, wolves. You don't always have gear. Sometimes it's just your lungs between you and the dark. Yarna updated his classification profile. Human psychological response. Unpredictable. Reflex conditioning. Predator class intimidation threshold. Advisory. Do not provoke, under any circumstances. Elsewhere, in a quiet corridor near the training halls, Thrask stood waiting. When Dane passed, the Kragan lowered his head. You are not prey, he said, voice soft with new weight. You are something else. Dane didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just nodded and walked on. The seismic sensor logs didn't lie. 3 different data nodes across the Helion Academy network, each calibrated to detect potential structural anomalies, had simultaneously triggered the moment Sergeant Dane Mercer roared. Not Thrask. Dane. The human. Academy staff didn't know what to do with that. For the first time in 12 training cycles, the post-exercise debrief was delayed, not because of injuries, but because the xenobiologists and acoustic engineers couldn't agree on the readouts. There's no species match, muttered Dr. Vale, adjusting her visual overlay as she examined a frame-by-frame resonance mapping of Dane's roar. The acoustic signature shows traits of both low-frequency threat displays and high-decibel panic calls. But his physiology shouldn't be able to sustain either, countered another. He has no subharmonic vocal sacs, no exoresonator, not even throat plating. Then explain how a 6'2" biped just destabilized our internal sensors using nothing but air from his lungs. Silence. Below the observation deck, the cadets were still processing what they'd seen. Rumors moved faster than truth, but for once, they weren't exaggerated. No one denied it. No one questioned it. They'd heard it. Felt it. A sound that didn't match his body. A roar that cracked the predator hierarchy of a dozen species in an instant. In the barracks that night, no one mocked Dane. No one whispered about skin or softness. No one dared. Thrask didn't even return to his dorm pod. He remained in one of the lower meditation chambers, seated on the stone floor, legs folded beneath him, breathing in silence. The instructors didn't disturb him. A Kragan processing humiliation was dangerous, but a Kragan processing respect? That was rare. Dane, for his part, sat on the edge of his bunk in silence. The lights were dimmed, his boots were off, and he rubbed his temples gently. The roar hadn't hurt, not in the way people assumed. But it had taken something out of him, something deep and old. He'd done it before, long ago. In a canyon where rescue had gone sideways, a cougar had stalked their camp perimeter during the night. Dane, with no weapons and no backup, had made himself bigger, louder, had screamed into the dark until it turned and fled. It wasn't bravery, it was biology. It was survival. And he hadn't done it since. Until now. The door to the barracks slid open with a soft chime. Captain Yarna entered, flanked by 2 xenopsych advisors. She stood tall and unreadable, her 12 fingers clasped behind her back. Sergeant Mercer, she said evenly. Dane stood. We'd like to speak with you. Now. He nodded. No questions. They led him not to the debrief room, but into the research wing, an area of the academy rarely visited by cadets. The corridors here were colder, the lights bluer. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the occasional beep of scanners or hiss of sterilizers. Inside a small observation dome, a tri-projection display lit the air with layered readouts of his performance during the exercise. Muscle response, laryngeal expansion, pulmonary stress. And, at the center, a seismic wave graph that looked like a mini quake. Dr. Vielle turned from the display as Dane entered. Her eyes were tired but focused. Sergeant, she said, we've reviewed the footage, and your medical file. Dane gave a small nod. All right. According to Earth medical records, you served for 10 years in a wilderness search and rescue unit, specializing in wildfire zones and deep canyon extractions. Is that correct? Yes. Your lungs show microscarring along the bronchial walls. Not from injury, but from strain long-term exertion, repetitive overuse. Also correct. You train to shout, Vielle said, more to herself than to him, to call across valleys, over wind, against nature itself. You didn't evolve the roar, you built it. Dane didn't answer. Do you understand what that means? She asked. I suppose you're going to tell me. She stepped closer. The Kragan species spent hundreds of thousands of years perfecting vocal dominance. Evolution gave them weaponized lungs. But you? You forged a threat display using effort, repetition, and will. And it worked. Captain Yarna spoke next. More than worked. You disrupted a Kragan's predator reflex. That's not intimidation. That's a biological override. Dane raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Yarna regarded him for a moment longer. We've reclassified your psychological threat profile. Effective immediately, your training path will diverge. Diverge how? He asked. You'll remain with the main cohort, but you'll be cleared for specialized field ops training. Integration roles. Conflict, de-escalation. In certain theaters, human unpredictability is an asset. I'm not here to be a symbol, Dane said plainly. You're not, Yarna replied, but symbols are rarely volunteers. Behind her, the seismic graph looped again, the shape of Dane's roar a wave that should never have existed. Back in the main cadet halls, the whispers continued, but now they were different. Did you hear it? One Sullet cadet asked. I felt it, another said, rubbing the back of her neck, like something ancient, like a cave collapsing. Or something waking up inside it, the first replied. Dane returned to the training fields the next morning. He wore the same fatigues, walked the same walk, and spoke with the same economy of words. But now the air around him felt different. No one stood in his way. Even Thrask, who now lingered near the edge of the sparring rings during drills, said nothing when Dane passed. But his eyes followed him, not with hostility, with interest. During an obstacle course later that day, a younger cadet, a three-legged Trivar, slipped during a gravity shift and cried out. Dane didn't hesitate. He crossed the gap with a grappling tether, caught the cadet's arm, and anchored them both until the field stabilized. The Trivar looked up, stunned. Why did you help me? Dane's expression didn't change, because someone should. That answer made its way through the ranks faster than his roar. Some cadets began adjusting how they addressed him. Not the human. Not skin creature. Now it was just Dane. That night, Thrask finally spoke again. He approached Dane at the training lockers, claws folded inward, posture neutral. I have never lost control of my roar, Thrask said. Never needed to. Until you. Dane turned slightly. That wasn't my goal. But it happened. Yes. Thrask considered that. My ancestors say the roar defines the Kragan, that it is our lineage, our identity. And mine say that when the forest is too loud, Dane said, you make more noise. The Kragan huffed once. Almost. A laugh. You should visit our hunting moons, Thrask said after a pause. We test each other with sound and silence. You would not be out of place. I'll think about it. The two stood there for a beat, then parted. The next day, the Academy's central AI updated its interspecies guidebook with a new entry. Species, human. Behavioral class, adaptive resilient. Response to threat. Variable. Advisory, do not provoke. Capable of counter-predator escalation. The final line, added by a quiet consensus of instructors and observers alike, reads simply, humans roar back. And from that point forward, no one at Helion Academy ever looked at Dane Mercer the same way again. By the third month, Dane Mercer had become the most quietly discussed figure in the Helion Academy's history. Not because he shouted orders. Not because he challenged anyone. Because he didn't. And that unsettled them more than if he had. After the roar, instructors monitored him more closely. They expected something to change, some show of ego, some escalation of pride. But nothing shifted. Dane kept showing up on time, completing every drill with clinical calm. His meals were simple, his conversations shorter than most species' greeting protocols. He simply existed at a steady hum, beneath the noise of galactic ego. which, to many cadets, made him terrifying. The Academy, a structure built to accommodate over 200 species and twice as many temperaments, wasn't designed for cultural silence. Bravado was common currency. Honor duels, vocal dominance rituals, pheromone contests, these were normal. Dane didn't trade in any of them. Yet, somehow, he had carved space. Thrask, meanwhile, had changed too. The Kragan no longer sought conflict. He no longer spoke in overt challenges. Instead, he followed Dane during joint exercises, studying his movements, mirroring his decisions. Where Dane adapted quietly, Thrask studied it out loud. "Your reflex curve is strange," he said once, during a simulation involving collapsing corridors. "You don't brace, you move into it." "Because hesitation kills," Dane said, pulling a stabilizing strut into place as the two worked through a debris-strewn corridor. "Is that a human doctrine?" "It's a rescue doctrine. Most of our doctrine comes from watching people die slowly, so we learn to move fast." Thrask was quiet for a beat. "I do not like watching slow deaths," he said finally. "No one does," Dane replied. "Some of us just had more practice with it." That night, Thrask requested additional sparring drills with Dane. It raised eyebrows. "Careful," another cadet warned him. "That human might not look it, but he bends predators." "I do not wish to bend him," Thrask replied. "I wish to learn how he stands straight." In the training ring, they circled each other without speaking. Dane was smaller, lighter, unarmored. Thrask moved like a mountain wrapped in thunder. The room watched from behind shielded partitions, unsure whether they were about to witness respect or regret. Then it began. Not with violence, with rhythm. Thrask lunged low. Dane sidestepped, redirecting force rather than resisting it. He didn't try to match strength, he used angles, timing, and terrain. Every time Thrask overcommitted, Dane redirected. Every time Dane struck, it was precise, minimal, and efficient. The Kragan didn't fall. But neither did Dane. 30 minutes later, they ended the match in a mutual lock. Dane beneath, arm twisted but unbroken, Thrask above, breathing heavily, claws dug into the mat just inches from Dane's face. And both of them laughing. Not loud. Not cocky. Just tired and alive. In the aftermath, more cadets began pairing with Dane in drills, not to challenge, but to learn. His endurance was legendary. His approach, unlike anything they'd seen. The Vakari called him the Still Flame. The Stronarians referred to him as the Echo. Even the Velethin, a species of silent stalkers who communicated through micropulse pheromones, gave him a subtle head tilt whenever they passed. Respect. Earned the human way without dominance, without broadcast. One evening, a high-tier diplomatic scenario was announced, a training designed to test negotiation, cultural blending, and crisis mediation. The simulation involved an alien ship stranded in neutral territory, with internal disputes threatening to erupt into violence. Dane was selected as liaison. Thrask, surprisingly, volunteered to assist. They entered the sim together, dressed not in combat gear, but neutral ambassadorial robes loose, non-threatening, symbolic of peace. Inside the simulation chamber, holograms rendered the ship's corridors, crew, and conflict zones. Multiple species argued, pacing and snarling in guttural dialects. Dane didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. He simply listened, catalogued tone, watched postures. Thrask stood silently behind him, his massive frame a wall of barely contained energy, but he didn't interrupt. When Dane finally stepped forward, he didn't raise his voice. He just asked one question. Who's afraid of being unheard? The chamber stilled. A few eyes narrowed. One of the simulated officers snarled. Dane stepped closer. Your systems are failing. Supplies are low. You've spent days blaming each other. But that's not what this is about. You're not fighting over space or air. You're fighting because nobody is listening. Thrask tilted his head, watching. Dane knelt beside a sputtering console and began rerouting power without being asked. He didn't make speeches. He didn't beg. He helped. The simulation recalibrated. Conflict levels dropped. Diplomacy, logged as successful. Thrask approached him after the session, head slightly bowed. You did not posture. You did not declare strength, and yet they obeyed. No one obeyed, Dane replied. They trusted. Is that different? Obedience fades when pressure's gone. Trust holds when no one's watching. Thrask was silent for a long time. Then he spoke quietly. My people do not understand trust. Then you're not alone, Dane said. Most don't. News of the simulation outcomes spread rapidly. In the following days, Dane's assignments shifted. He was sent to mentor integration cadets from species that didn't mesh well with the dominant factions. High-risk groups, emotionally reactive ones, cadets who'd nearly been ejected for behavioral conflicts. He didn't fix them. He simply stood with them, ate with them, ran drills with them, and in that presence, steady, neutral, human, they calmed. Sometimes, that's all it took. Still, not everyone was pleased. In the higher command circles of the Academy, debates sparked behind closed doors. The Academy had never factored humans as more than auxiliary support units, logistics, midfield specialists, or adaptability experts, not predators, not leaders. But now, Dane's profile data showed something unique. He wasn't an apex threat. He wasn't even categorized as high danger. He was something else entirely. Disruptive stability. No natural weapons, no feral strength. But wherever he walked, the predator-prey dynamic cracked. Not because he broke it, because he ignored it. And others started doing the same. Captain Yarna reviewed the latest observation report in silence. The final line read, Recommendation: Human behavioral impact exceeds projection models. Social influence presents restructuring potential across interspecies cadet norms. She set the file down and leaned back in her chair. The human didn't roar to conquer, she said to herself. He roared to survive. In a far-off training bay, Dane stood beside a Velethin cadet, struggling with fine motor tool use. He didn't correct them. He waited. Let them try again. Let them fail safely. The cadet adjusted. Succeeded. Dane nodded. Small, quiet nod. Far away, a new class of cadets entered the academy gates. Among them, a few pointed toward the central spire and asked the same question. Is it true? The human made the predator flinch? Another cadet answered. No, he didn't make him flinch. He made him listen. And that more than any roar was what echoed now through the halls of Helion Academy. It started with a transmission. Encrypted, fragmented, originating from the outer edge of the Zareth Expanse, an unclaimed zone between Helion territory and the Talvan Drift. The message repeated in a loop, just 5 words. Cadet vessel, disabled, no control. The signal was traced to a training shuttle that had gone dark during a live environment field exercise. A joint species crew of 5 cadets was on board mid-exam, deep space, low support. Standard protocol allowed them to handle their own emergencies. That was the point, but this wasn't a minor systems error. Telemetry showed propulsion offline, life support degrading, proximity to a gravity well. The gravity anomaly was worse than expected. Not a black hole, not a star. A sleeper nest. Talvan, stock ships, organic raider vessels, each grown like living bone wrapped in memory steel, had been dormant in the system for decades. Hostile, silent, always waiting. Now they weren't waiting anymore. Helion Command scrambled a retrieval team, but with the Expanse's distortion fields, long-range deployment would take hours. The cadets didn't have hours. Captain Yarna's voice cut across the operations room. We need a rapid deploy insertion, low profile, high adaptability, no escalation unless engaged. She didn't wait for a volunteer. She looked up from the tactical display. Send Mercer. In the hangar bay, Dane was already strapping into the responder pod when Thrask appeared beside him, holding 2 gravity clamps and a compact field disruptor. You're not going alone, Thrask said. You're not cleared for command insertion. I'm not asking for clearance, I'm offering backup. For a moment, Dane considered arguing. He didn't. 5 minutes later, the responder pod launched angled through the edge of Helion's deep space warp ring and into the bleed of the Expanse. The pod wasn't fast, but it was built to withstand chaos. Inside, Dane ran through the sensor feed. Oxygen levels on the stranded shuttle were dropping fast. The cadets were sealed inside the cockpit, fallback protocols activated, but the main door was jammed. No communication, no maneuvering, and one Talvan stockship had begun to drift closer. Thrask watched the readings from the second station. No emissions from the stockship. It's testing them, waiting. Or it's hungry, Dane replied. The pod jolted, entry complete. They latched onto the stranded shuttle's hull within minutes. Magnetic clamps engaged. The pod's cutter arm extended, carving a controlled breach into the side. Seconds later, Dane and Thrask entered the corridor. The shuttle was nearly silent inside. Emergency lights flickered. Ice crystals clung to the vents. Dane tapped his helmet. Thermal trace? Thrask scanned. 5 bodies, clustered in the command capsule. Low movement. One is unconscious. They reached the inner hatch. Manual override failed. Dane pressed his palm to the surface and leaned in. Cadets, this is Sergeant Mercer. We're here. Don't panic. A soft tapping echoed back. They were alive. Dane signaled Thrask to begin cutting through the panel. The moment the seal broke, a rush of air hissed out, and with it, the unmistakable scent of heat-stressed oxygen recyclers. The cadets stared in shock. Mercer, one of them croaked. They sent you? He offered a calm nod. Let's get you out. They began triage quickly. One cadet was unconscious from CO2 saturation. The others were coherent but disoriented. Thrask lifted the unconscious cadet easily, placing him into a compression sling. But then the lights dimmed. Dane turned toward the viewport. The stockship was awake. Not just awake. Alerted. It had shifted its alignment, bone spines flaring, tendrils twitching across the void, watching. The ship had no windows, no visible crew, just mass and intent. Dane's voice remained steady. We're moving now. Secondary lock bay. Quiet as you can. But even as he spoke, the Talvan ship accelerated. Not fast, not aggressive, but forward. Deliberate. It had chosen them. The corridor to the secondary bay was too narrow for formation. Dane took point. Thrask covered rear. The cadets moved between them, limbs trembling, suit seals rattling faintly with each step. They reached the pod just as the stockship deployed a signal. It wasn't audio. It was pressure, a directed blast of sub-resonant frequencies that struck the shuttle like a pulse. The youngest cadet screamed. Another dropped to his knees, eyes wide, chest heaving. It's inside my head, he gasped. The ship's inside my head. Thrask moved to shield him. It's a fear spike, synthetic, designed to disorient prey. Dane didn't move. He turned toward the open hatch and stepped back into the corridor. What are you doing? Thrask shouted. We need to move now. Dane didn't answer right away. He stood in the center of the passage, helmet off, eyes focused. Then he took a slow breath and roared. Not like before. Worse. This was deeper, full body, from the base of the spine to the top of his skull. Not a sound of panic, but one of challenge. It didn't just echo, it bent the metal around him. A canyon storm wrapped in fury. The Talvan ship paused. It actually paused, then retracted. Its forward momentum stalled, its tendrils curled inward. The pressure stopped. Inside the shuttle, cadets wept in relief. One of them, barely able to speak, whispered, "How? How did you do that?" Dane didn't reply immediately. He lowered his arms, his chest still heaved. He looked toward the viewport again. That wasn't for them, he said finally. That was for the Predator. He walked back to the pod, face unreadable. Thrask stared at him with awe. It listened, the Kragan said. Dane nodded. Sometimes even Predators don't want to risk getting hurt. The responder pod detached cleanly and jumped to pre-programmed warp just minutes later. When they landed back on Helion grounds, medical staff took over instantly. The cadets were stabilized. News of the encounter spread faster than containment protocols could slow. And then came the investigations. The xenobiology team dissected the audio records of the encounter. The frequency Dane used had no analog. It wasn't language. It wasn't species-specific. It was instinct made audible. Survival, not as reaction but as communication. Helion Command convened a closed-door assembly. Dane's presence at the meeting was requested, not demanded, requested. He entered the chamber wearing the same uniform as always. No medals. No stripes. No symbols of what he'd done. Captain Yarna stood from the central podium. "Sergeant Mercer," she said, "your actions resulted in the safe return of 5 cadets and the de-escalation of a first contact event with a Talvan raider." "Yes, ma'am." "Your method was not protocol." "No, ma'am." "Explain your reasoning." Dane looked up slowly. When cornered, predators rely on predictable responses. Prey runs, prey pleads. I gave them something else, something loud enough to be remembered. Silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, one of the instructors, a hardened Velethan tactician known for his emotionless precision, spoke. "Did you intend to speak to the ship?" "I didn't think it would understand," Dane said, "but I hoped it would recognize the shape of a challenge." "And if it hadn't?" Dane shrugged. "We'd be dead." There was no arrogance in the words. Just truth. Captain Yarna turned to the gathered officers. "I propose formal recognition of a new combat classification." She tapped her datapad. "Human Threat Response Designation. Predator Class Counter-Intimidation Capability." The approval came without dissent. By the end of the cycle, cadets across the academy began adapting new reflex drills. Not just to withstand fear, but to counter it. The training manuals updated their doctrine. The quote at the end read simply, "Humans do not run. Humans do not freeze. Sometimes, humans roar back." Dane never celebrated. He kept running drills. Kept helping the slowest cadet